So I'm really delighted to be guiding proceedings this morning. And we all know that apart from all the other challenges that we face in Ireland at the moment, climate action and decarbonisation is critical for us and for future generations. We need to make significant cuts to emissions by 2030, and the government has set ambitious targets. This event is about learning how to meet them and the kind of leadership required to get us there. It's rare to have so many CEOs in one building, and SEAI are keen for today to be about sharing experiences and knowledge, learning from each other to hear about what's possible in terms of decarbonisation in the various parts of the public sector. Organisations are at different stages of their journey, and SEAI hope that this event will give plenty of examples of leadership, and you will all go home feeling inspired about the task ahead. Ireland is a small country, which we can use to our advantage. Making connections and sharing knowledge means, in theory, we can all move faster together. We have lots of interesting people to hear about, so we won't waste any time. A little light housekeeping. Please make sure that your phone is on silent. Please note the fire exits. And if you are sharing anything on social media, please use the hashtag SEAI Public Sector. So, first up, to give us a deeper perspective of SEAI's vision and role in public sector decarbonisation, please welcome SEAI CEO William Walsh.
I'm delighted to welcome you to SEAI's Public Sector Conference for 2023. In SEAI, we love this event. There's always a great vibe of positivity and a real sense of action. The theme for today's conference is Leadership in Action. And what we want to do today is to recognise decarbonisation leadership in action across the public sector. We want to acknowledge those who are actively planning roadmaps and delivering projects towards 2030 and 2050 targets. We want to inspire others by highlighting success stories, motivate public bodies to take responsibility for their own individual targets and roadmaps, and we want to encourage public bodies to learn from each other, think bigger, and actively collaborate to develop and implement solutions to achieve carbon and energy efficiency targets. At SEAI, we collaborate with others to drive climate action, helping our public sector partners find our decarbonisation pathways. We also facilitate collaboration through our networks. I would encourage all participants today to network at this event, to see what is working for your fellow public service agencies and departments, and how you might integrate those energy solutions into your organisation. Today we plan to get deeper into the partnerships that SEAI facilitate, as we take a look at how the public sector are delivering on our ambitious national targets while implementing technological solutions that are available right now. It is now clearer than ever what we have to do. Sectoral carbon budgets are now in place and our emissions reduction targets are legally binding. Our new climate governance structures will hold us all to account. This means embedding decarbonisation within the way we work and implementing climate action across multiple solutions that are available today, be they district heating, wind, heat pumps, electric vehicles, solar, and other renewable and energy efficient technologies. In the public sector, we collectively have to reduce our emissions from 2 million tonnes to 1 million tonnes. Our performance will be measured, and we'll need to also keep up with increasing legislation and future targets coming down the tracks. In particular, the public sector needs to focus our efforts on the energy we use to heat our buildings, and district heating represents a huge opportunity for us in that regard. As evidenced by the presence of senior public and civil servants here today, it is recognised across public service leaders that a strategic approach is needed to manage their decarbonisation obligations while navigating business risks and opportunities. I'm also delighted that Minister Ryan is here with us for the plenary session, highlighting leadership in action at government level. During the plenary session, you will hear from 10 CEOs across a range of public bodies at different stages of their energy decarbonisation journeys, who will demonstrate the leadership and action that is required to strategically address the targets. We hope you and your organisations can identify with at least one of the showcased organisations, no matter where you are on your decarbonisation journey. Importantly, I wish to emphasise that SEAI is here to help you through a range of supports. SEAI provide training, technical expertise, financial support, advisory supports, Pathfinder programmes, climate action roadmap templates and monitoring and reporting. We have a significant amount of funding available through our grant programmes such as community grants, exceed grants, renewable heat incentive, solar PV and energy audit support scheme. However, the main vehicle for building energy decarbonisation in the public sector is the Pathfinder programme. In 2022, SEAI provided 33 million to public bodies, which was matched 50-50 by public bodies. And this year, through the state, we will invest 60 million and a similar amount over the next 3 years. This will mobilise investments, resources and approaches across various subsectors in the public sector and unlock substantial future investments from government departments and other sources. Furthermore, in SEAI, we're practising what we preach and we understand the scale of challenge on an everyday level. SEAI is also a public body with ambitious energy efficiency and decarbonisation targets. As a co-tenant across multiple buildings, we can relate to the issues we are seeing in the sector. But aligning with the team today, myself and SEAI staff are fully committed to achieving our targets within the next few years. I'm also aware that in parallel, many of my public sector colleagues will be expected to deliver increasing public services across various sectors over the next few years, such as in areas of health and education. It is critical that we decouple growth from fossil fuel energy use. To do this and to achieve decarbonisation in our sector, we need your strategic vision and leadership. I hope that today will leave you feeling motivated and energised as you journey along your decarbonisation roadmaps. Be ambitious and know that we in SEAI are here to help you collaborate, think bigger and work together to achieve our carbon and energy efficiency targets. I look forward to the exciting day and thank you.
Thank you so much, William. Now, next, to give us a sense of how important it is to achieve our emission reduction targets and the challenges we're facing in meeting them, as well as how good it will be for all of us when we succeed, please welcome Minister for the Environment, Climate and Communications, Eamon Ryan.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with such a big crowd and to be with other people who are leading in terms of our climate response. I look forward to the panel discussion. The scale of the challenge, the scale of the change we need to make on climate is beyond compare. It's based on scientific fact. It's still a probability, but what the Paris Climate Agreement sets out, requires us to do as a developed country to reduce the risk of runaway destructive climate change is to halve our emissions in a decade and to go net zero in 3. And that's no small change. That's easy to say, but now we have to deliver it. And in Ireland, it's an even bigger task because our country is growing. Our population is growing, our economy is booming. But it's not a per capita reduction we have to do, it's a quantum for the whole country. So we have a real, and also, we haven't paid sufficient attention. We haven't shown sufficient leadership. But that's changing. It changed about 5 or 6 years ago when we asked our citizens what sort of actions would we need to take, presented the right information, in my mind, to them scientifically, and they came back with the right answers in terms of the broad steps we need to take. We started going in the right direction 4 or 5 years ago when the Joint Oireachtas Committee, we saw common agreement across our House, all the parties in Irish politics, all the groups. And Richard Bruton, in fairness to them, putting that into a climate action plan that started to show ambition, started to show how we could show leadership. We have now one of the strongest climate laws in the world. It's really effective, has good institutions like Sir Mary Donnelly heading up our Climate Advisory Council to keep us on the straight and narrow. And it's strong in law. If we don't start meeting our first target, 2025, under law, the ministers are responsible for their own sectoral emissions and have to start changing the policy measures to get us back on track. Local government, I'm going down to Wexford tomorrow to meet Wexford County Council. I am going to go around to every council in the country because under law, by March next year, they have to present real detailed plans how in local government we play our part in meeting the overall target. It's not just Irish law. European law is even stronger now. There's 20 pieces of legislation before the various European councils, which will be implemented in the next year, which actually push us to even greater ambition. All accelerated by the war in Ukraine, which shows the need for us to rid our dependence on fossil fuels is for security as well as environmental reasons. We're not going to go to Europe and say Ireland opts out. We, the Green Ireland, are not going to turn around and say, oh, those targets are too tough, we can't meet them, I'm sorry. We're not going to have to pay the fines. Ken will be able to give us chapter and verse what it would cost us to buy or try and buy our way out. You can't buy your way out, but that's not an option. Third reason, what I say to my colleagues in this incredibly daunting, big challenge task is we're not going to bow out of it, is that this is also the future for the economy. The companies in our country that provide a lot of the employment, a lot of the income, that tax income that allows us to run, they're committing. If any company looking 10, 15 years down the line is recognising they won't be in business unless they're part of the solution, and they will want to be part of a country that is a part of this change. So for those three reasons, we don't have a choice. We have to make a leap. Can I say one thing? If I was to leave one message behind, I'm actually very confident that the Irish public service, the civil servants in local authority, in government departments, in state agencies, in commercial semi-states, I actually have real faith in our ability to make this leap. We have a capable public service, highly capable, committed. Now, the challenge is not small because, just as I said, our country is growing, our public service needs to grow. Danny McCoy, the head of IBEC, is constantly making this point when you meet him in government. Our private sector has grown by, 1 million jobs in the last 20, 30 years. Our public sector has stayed the same. So we have this incredible challenge that we have to halve our emissions in the next 8 years while we have a big expansion in our public service to meet the needs of our people. It's not impossible. It will actually improve our public service. It'll see us living and working in offices which are more comfortable, which are healthier, and which in the long run are much cheaper to run. It'll see us switching away from a car-dependent transport system where the public sector, like all sectors of our society, went down a path that just won't work, not just because of climate reasons, but because of gridlock reasons. We can't all drive in and out every morning, and the roads just to be full. We need to make the switch to public transport, to active travel. And we need to show leadership in the public sector in making that change. COVID will help us do it. The patterns of change already, the change is already happening, remote working, also just different ways of doing things. We've shown what is possible. We've learned in government as well how our public service can be really fast and flexible in meeting that challenge. So we're applying a lot of the principles of how you make such change happen. We've 6 task forces we're establishing in government, in offshore renewable energy, in sustainable mobility, in heating our buildings, in climate communications, in delivering a just transition, and perhaps most importantly, in the land reuse review, which marries the protection and return of biodiversity, as well as tackling climate. Those 6 task forces bring together different people from different government departments, bring outside agencies and academics so that we do well what we do in this country when the public service works well. Flexible, not being afraid to make mistakes, not hammering someone who risks making that bold move. Rewarding ambition, rewarding people who put their head up over the parapet. And that's what encourages me here today. There's a full room of people who are clearly interested and committed and willing to show the leadership we need. Last thing I'd say, it's an uncertain time in the world. It's an uncertain time in our country. It's an uncertain time in our city. Did I ever think I'd see to Dublin with some of the scenes you see in the streets in recent weeks? We need a sense of pride and purpose and direction. And making this leap on climate helps us give us that sense of civic pride and responsibility. Public service at the start, leading because we can. We have that capability of doing it. And that sets us on a course as a country which is really important for our younger people, not just for the security of their future in a climate way, but living meaningfully in a world of purpose and progress and social as well as environmental cohesion. The metaphor I have is of a ship. The ship is starting to turn. We are starting to see it work in public transport, in active travel, in heating our buildings, in switching to renewables, in reducing the waste and cutting out the plastic. We're starting to do it. It takes time. But once we've made that turn, like a ship going from starboard to port, actually once we'll then pick up speed and go in the right direction. That ship, if you imagine it, has many sails, like one of those old Indian line vessels. That's the metaphor I have. And every sail we pull up helps push us and pull this ship in the direction we need to go. That's the job here today. How we raise the sail in the public service, in our schools, our hospitals, our offices. And we head in this new direction that gives us purpose and meaning. That's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ryan. Now I'm going to introduce the other members of our panel. Chairperson of the Climate Change Advisory Council, Mary Donnelly. From the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, Ken Cleary. From Leopardstown Park Hospital, Anne-Marie O'Grady. And Chief Executive of Bus Éireann, Stephen Kent. You're all most welcome. Mary, I might start with you if you don't mind. Can you kind of set the scene for us in terms of why public sector targets are so important and what are the challenges in terms of us meeting them?
So I think it's fair to say that we should start at the beginning. And when you look at the structure of our society and the leadership role that the public sector has in our society across so many parts of how we live, how our society is structured, how our economy functions, it's quite obvious that the public sector has to be pivotal in this regard. It's probably also fair to say that you're all very much in the centre of the discussion and the debate about how we achieve the legislative requirement that the Minister mentioned in terms of climate change. But it goes beyond just climate. Of course, it's very important that we achieve our objectives and we achieve our reductions in terms of the emissions coming from the activities that we perform. But when we look at the areas where we can have an impact and where you can have an impact, it's primarily in the area of energy. Energy is our biggest emitter of CO2 into the atmosphere, and it's the area we need to change. And energy, you know, I think it's about 4 years ago we had a conversation like this at another conference. Energy has become centre stage of discussions amongst all of us. At home, when we look at the price of the electricity bill coming in through the door, when we go to work, when we go to the pub, when we meet our friends and our family. It's actually centre stage. And the challenge that the energy crisis that we find ourselves at the moment fits perfectly with the climate crisis that we're in as well. And the solution for the two of those is the same. It's very simple. You know, we need to use less energy, and what energy we use needs to be sustainable. And in terms of using less energy, that's where demand management and demand substitution becomes pivotal. And the public sector needs to be and is in a leadership role in that context. We have 3 services from energy. We basically get transport, we get heating, and we get power. Some of them are very visible in terms of energy emission reduction. But for the moment, if I just start with, say, heating, because of course, heating is to some extent the Cinderella of energy, but it's an area where we now have alternatives available to us. We have possibilities to secure the envelope of our buildings and make the heating system sustainable so that we can use less of it and it will be decarbonised. And in that context, the public sector is a leader. It's a leader in that respect and needs to show to the rest of the country how this can be done. And it's not just in areas of heating, it's obviously in transport as well, and in areas of power, and that's a big, big story, obviously, going forward. But delivering that result through a leadership profile is absolutely fundamental. Now, I think it's fair to say that the public sector has already delivered. You know, take credit for what you have achieved. It has been a little bit variable, but the public sector has achieved energy efficiency. Unfortunately, you're now being asked to do more. You know, you're the best pupils in the class, but as a consequence, you have to continue your leadership role and go further. And a 2-to-1 is not an easy objective, but it is achievable. And it can be done using what we have available. Obviously, the money is a key element, but it's the thought process. It's thinking through. Every time we're going to use something that requires energy, put a question there. Can we do it differently? What are the alternatives? And not just in the short term. It's something I plead for as well, is think about the long-term benefit. I mean, sure, some of you have been, or hopefully maybe live, in houses that have been retrofitted that are, you know, high BER rating. The comfort level is just fantastic by comparison. So it's not just that we do this because it's a legislative requirement. We do it because it makes our lives better. And in terms of the energy that we use, insofar as we can reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels, not only do we achieve our climate objectives, we achieve our targets under the energy efficiency thing, but we free ourselves from being subservient to international and global price hikes that we cannot control and that end up costing us a lot of money.
Thank you so much. Stephen, I could see you nodding there. You're from Bosserin and you're already in action mode. Do you want to give us a sense of your decarbonisation journey to date and where you're going for 2030?
Yeah, well, just to take a practical step from our point of view in the company, we have about 1,100 vehicles, and the majority of the 96% of our energy consumption is due to the fossil fuel, diesel. We're burning diesel every day. So if I take a step back from us, we can see that the fix is in the vehicle transition. But before we got to the vehicle transition, from our perspective, we took a leadership view in terms of 2020. We obviously had a balanced scorecard of objectives in terms of objectives and people and customer and operations. What we did in 2020, listening to a lot of it, is we brought in a new pillar within the business called sustainability. We appointed a chief sustainability officer. And we ended up saying that we knew that the transition was going to be put in, that we were going to have to make a big change in terms of vehicles, but mostly we were going to have to change the culture. Around the country at the moment for us, we're in 71 locations around Ireland and kind of built around 17 depots. And those depots have all got, 400 to 500 mechanics that have learned nothing for the last 100 years except about the internal combustion engine. So you're going to have to go out and do practical talks and talk to these people about reskilling, even if it was going to come down the path. Then you had to engage then with the National Transport Authority, who were very helpful for us as a regulator, because ultimately we rely on them for the funding of the PSO vehicles. But only on the PSO vehicles, they're public service obligation vehicles. So we have a Department of Education where we have 300 of the 1,100 vehicles we operated through the schools. There's a dialogue that needs to happen in order to make an orderly transition with them as well, convincing them that we have to transition from old vehicles to new vehicles. So our decarbonisation journey has been multifaceted. We know it's in vehicle and transition. The investment has started. And we looked at various different types. We've moved into hybrid vehicles and we replaced the whole vehicle fleet in Galway initially with hybrid diesel vehicles. We then took in partnership with the NTA and other partners, the first trial of a hydrogen bus. And that went in 2020. You'll see one parked outside on the lot if anybody is interested, and you're looking at that. Now, there was only 3 of those vehicles put in on a route in order that we get learnings for it. And that learning obviously is still building, and at the moment the government is in the process of developing and publishing the hydrogen strategy. We await the outcome of that, but it has led to lots of collaborations that we've had to engage in with other outside companies to move it along. And of course then what we ended up doing is, because then the National Transport Authority had made the decision that no diesel buses were going to go into towns and cities, for any new purchases in the future. The first transition happened 2 weeks ago, where we moved into Athlone as the first town and put 11 vehicles in there, which is the first time that we have an entire network of electric vehicles now delivering the service. So that was a significant milestone. And the government announced there was 35 Pathfinder projects, which a lot of you will know about. This is the first of them to launch. So it means that now we're going to try and take the learnings out of the electric town network and apply those into other towns and cities, and hopefully start moving into Limerick and Galway and Cork in the next couple of years. So there's a pathway established now. So from our perspective, it's clear in the vehicles, but the cultural journey and the objectives and how you set yourself up to lead on those conversations, to engage with the funding that's going to be required, with the reskilling that's required, that's a huge other part of the business that you have to do. And then you have to recognize, lastly, is you can't do it yourself. Like Athlone was delivered last week and the minister came down and helped launch it with us. He would have seen 20 other companies that were sitting inside in the audience that launched that with us. So it required enormously on collaborations, on the ESB networks, etc., to be all in place. So it is significant in terms of your outreach and your dependency, and you can't do it alone.
Yeah, it's very much a team effort, decarbonisation for all of us. And I think we're all jealous, well I was anyway, when I saw Athlone getting their electric buses. I was like, come on, Cork. And Marie, you represent a much different operation to Bus Éireann, and probably the one that maybe a lot of people in the audience can identify. Can you tell us what you're doing in Leopardstown Park Hospital in terms of your journey?
Yeah, so Leopardstown Park Hospital is a 135-bed older person specialist service. So we'd have day services, respite rehab, residential, and some sheltered accommodation. Old buildings, some of them listed, which is always a joy when you're trying to retrofit. We have, we're a state body, and we have an independent board appointed by the Minister for Health. And I suppose back in 2016, I suppose initially initiated by our facilities team, commenced work with the OPW in terms of the optimising power work. So we tied in with them. We got our energy advisor, we got metering, we got logging, and established a green energy team within the organisation. And I think the key piece coming back to team is a very broad church. We were very fortunate that we had a board member who had a particular interest in the area, and he has been in attendance throughout that journey and bringing that expertise that we wouldn't necessarily have had. Having data is certainly the most important piece. Without it, we're blind. And having very simple data allowed us to work on the behavioural change. I think, as was referenced earlier, the world has changed. Back in 2016, it was kind of a niche, off to the side, nice to have. We all know that it is absolutely core. Within that energy team, we would have had estates people, we would have had catering manager, we would have had porters, we would have had security. There's no point if the security guys are making checks at night, build it into the system that we're checking for simple things like lights on, etc. I suppose over the years we have had some retrofitting, so lighting and insulation in particular. One of the big barriers has been the fact that it was 50% funded. 50% is fantastic, but when you're on a single budget, single annual allocation, with very little VAT within that allocation, our ability to actually match that 50% was a massive, massive barrier. And I think the game changer now is the potential for 100% funding. So while we had ideas, the ability for us to realise our ambition was significantly limited. And I think the leadership shown by SEAI, the leadership shown by the HSE in building capacity and supports for agencies like ourselves is significant. We're a small agency. We have a small facilities team. We don't have the expertise. This is an emerging area of technology, emerging area on a constant basis. So we have very strategically partnered with our colleagues. And over the last particular period, last year plus, We've brought on board HSE Energy Advisor from the HSE Energy Bureau. We've the public sector mentor from the SEAI. We've had buildings advisors from the SEAI. So they're assisting us and bringing expertise and bringing knowledge to allow us to develop a real register of opportunities. And I think decisions have to be made about which opportunities are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck. This is public sector money, therefore we need to make sure we're using it as well as possible. So as the other initiative on the more kind of strategic side, we are in the middle of a design phase for a 125-bed redevelopment. And again, working in partnership with our colleagues in HSE Estates, we have that design process was tendered with an energy efficient design approach and looking at the near zero energy buildings target. That's planning for the future. It means trying not to make the problem worse, but we know we've an aim for a target for 2030. After 2030, there's a further target.
Yeah.
So we need to be making sure that whatever we're doing, we are taking the best steps forward in relation to that. So from a leadership perspective, one of the challenges certainly has been the language. And for me as a chief executive, getting my head around the language, and it was referenced earlier about training, education, that from the SEAI has been very powerful, and allowing our broad management team have been involved from the very start in our energy team. So using the training, getting an understanding. As was referenced earlier, thermal is massive. We're doing quite well on our lovely little glide path, but we will not hit any target without serious retrofit of our thermal aspects. So from, I suppose, leadership perspective, bringing the board on board, understanding the language. There's a huge number of acronyms which can be really intimidating and can mean that as a chief exec you can go, I'll leave it to the facilities. This is not a facilities issue. This is a management issue, it is a leadership issue, and it is making the right decisions with public money. If we don't do that, the money we will be spending, which needs to be put to patients and patient services, will be spent on energy. And ultimately, that's not right.
Which brings us nicely to Ken, because we're all talking about money, and you're the man with it. But I think though what you're saying, which is nice to hear, is that like there's enough barriers already, or there's enough things to overcome without money being one of them. Ken, do you want to give us a sense of what financing is available now and going into 2030?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think what I'd like to do in particular is just talk about that funding package and then what I think public sector bodies should be doing in relation to that. And I think the first point and the keyest point on all this is if you're waiting for the money to come to you, it won't. You need to be developing your projects. And let me explain what I mean about that in more detail. There's sometimes a misapprehension of what deep are those. We're not the ones authorising individual public sector investments. That's your parent departments, your boards, it's your senior management teams. What we do is we set the aggregate funding levels that are available to all government departments and public bodies via funding instruments, typically like the NDP. And to talk about the NDP for a second, I'm sure you're well familiar with it. It's 18 months old at this stage, but it's a record level of capital investment in the economy that'll see us reach 5% capital investment in G&I, which will be, versus G&I start, be the highest in Europe in that. In addition to that then, as time goes on, there will be additional funding streams that come on stream. And I suppose what I'm suggesting that you guys need to do is to be knocking on the doors of your senior management team, of your ministers, of your boards and so on, with projects, with strategic plans for the use of these funds, and with projects that are ready to go, that when funding streams that may become available are ready to do, it's a difficult decision for government in terms of where they should be allocating those funds. I mean, to talk again a little bit about funding specifically, I mean, in terms of that NDP, government departments and the public sector collectively underspent last year by €1 billion. It's €1 billion in capital funds that were available last year for public sector investment that weren't spent. Now, some of that will be taken on capital carryover, but some of it will be returned to the Exchequer and not used for those projects. So in other words, there is capital available. There will be, through the NDP, through those allocations that have been made, there will be further capital instruments. The Minister's talked about the conflict in Ukraine. One of the key EU responses to this is Repower EU, which will be making additional funds available to member states. And we have to, by the end of April, the government has to decide how Ireland is going to spend the funds that are being allocated to us from the EU for Repower EU. Again, public sector energy efficiency should be a part of that mix. But again, because the funding window and the spending window in which we have to make these allocations is quite narrow, we have to have confidence that these projects can be developed and implemented and the money spent and the construction undertaken in this period as well. So it's really all about you bringing forward these projects and these plans, as I said, up through the chain in your organisations, so that we do understand that there is scope there for more investment in this area, and as I said, the government can take appropriate decisions. And in terms of the structures then that will help you do that, I mean, Minister Ryan has already touched on a few of them. Like, no matter what organisation you're a part of, you now have a very specific mandate. You know, the 51% target for the public sector overall, but also in each individual agency has a mandate, whether it's public sector or civil service, that requires you to reach that target and contribute towards the reaching of that target, to have named officers at management board level, and to require you, each body, to again come up with a plan on how you're going to reach the 51%. So again, this is the window for you guys to be bringing forward these projects, these efficiency projects, whether they're retrofit, energy demand saving, or whatever they are. And in terms of then the role that DEEPA will play in helping you do this and making this more an easier process for you. Well, first of all, over the summer and into the estimates process ahead of the budget, we'll be looking at those medium-term capital allocations. So again, to give all of your agencies and departments certainty, which has been mentioned as being so important on a multi-year basis, because these, let's face it, these are multi-year projects in the vast majority of cases. So we'll be providing that for a significant period of time, for at least 5 years, to give you that certainty. But we're also then doing things that will help your appraisal of these projects and will help push forward these projects internally. We're going to massively increase the shadow price of carbon that's applied to public sector investment appraisal. So again, anything that reduces emissions, that limits it, will look far better in an appraisal versus any other projects that your departments and indeed the government may have to consider. We're also going to be streamlining the public sector, the public spending code quite considerably, again, to make the process easier to understand and to make the process more simplified, particularly for those projects that we'll say in inverted commas might be small, under a value of 200 million or thereabouts. So again, these are all the things that will help you come up with this strategic plan, to help you develop the projects, and it's up to you then to bring these projects forward through your senior management, to your boards, to your departments, to your ministers, so that when these funding discussions come up, whether they're about kind of reprofiling NDP expenditure as a result of underspend, or how we'll use new funding instruments, that you're part of the discussion and you're part of the mix on that. So I hope that gives you some insight into sort of where we see it from DEEPA's perspective. And just maybe to finish, I mean, the message that we'll be giving to government, or we have indeed already given to government, and in fact I believe is going to be published today, is that question that Minister Ryan spoke of. We've been working with his department on this cost of compliance. How much is the bill that the public sector, the taxpayers, might have to pay if we miss our targets? The number we've come up with, and there is uncertainty around it, but the number that we'll be publishing today suggests that this may cost us €8 billion if we fail to achieve our targets. Minister Ryan has talked about the professionalism within the public and civil service, the skills within it, and our perception by the public. I think if we are coming into another decade again, where taxpayers are paying a massive multi-billion euro bill for a failure of the civil and public service to deliver what we need to deliver on emissions, I think we'll go a long way towards losing that trust that's been built or rebuilt, even I would say, since the banking crisis 15 years ago. So you're the solution to this problem. So please bring them forward, as I said, up that chain that I've talked about. Thanks very much.
You actually make the hair stand up in the back of my neck there when you said 8 billion. Let's not do that. But actually, one of the questions that got submitted in advance of the event, which I might put you, Minister, which kind of relates to that, is that you might have your strategic plans, you might have your board in place, you might have been talking to your mechanics on the ground, but if your construction sector and the planning system is under pressure, how do you overcome those issues?
That is the biggest obstacle. It is people and our planning system. And what Ken says is true. We have to be fast here now. And the problem is our system. I said I have a real belief in advocacy for the public service and how we're actually good at doing things. But I think all of us would admit that speed is not exactly the signal that you're given out to in terms of, and I think particularly in the planning side, we have to resource that, and we have to recognise that delay is not a good here. Delay is going to cost us, and that's really important. Just on the financing, if I can just pick up on that, just to make the point, there's that potential €8 billion cost. There's also, when we switch away from the fossil fuels, there's a huge saving. That money's staying in our country because it'll be on Irish renewable electricity we'll be paying, rather than Qatari gas or Russian oil, or rather than it going out. So that immediately saves us. We also, just on the financing, the importance of the carbon tax is that it does give a really clear signal. That's about, is it 9 billion we're estimating, Ken? But we know it's going to come in year every year, and it's been rarely from Department of Public Expenditure. It is guaranteed to go to this 55% of going to retrofitting buildings. And thirdly, just give an example of where I don't think the capital is the real problem. I mean, spending it wisely is needed, but the Department of Finance issued a green bond there 3 weeks ago. Was it 3 billion? They raised 3 billion, 20-year money at 3.5% interest rate, and it was 10 times oversubscribed. Wow. Now, one of the key people, some of the key people, I was very into what Anne-Marie was taking about who are the key people. And I think what you said, Anne-Marie, was really impressive in terms of it's that security guard in turning off the light and simple things like that. Mm-hmm. But also you're an example, a CEO who stepped up and kind of said, this is my responsibility. I think there's another officer in so much of organizations, the accounting, the finance officers. We do need to start looking at clever ways in which we can finance some of this. And particularly in the schools, hospital sector, which is the really big number of public buildings, is to look at clever financing mechanisms where we can tap into some of that 3.5 billion in green bond financing, where the savings on the energy pay off the capital cost, so that you're not stuck in where do I raise the 50%. It's accountants are going to save the world here by kind of getting...
And builders and electricians and plumbers.
Yeah, but you start with the money. You're right in terms of the builders, electricians, plumbers. Simon Harris is really working on this. We've 2,000 people applied for apprenticeships, or just on the retrofitting side. So as I said, the ship is starting to turn. We're starting to see real numbers now coming through in terms of people going into this, seeing a career in it, money being available and being deployed, and now we need to scale up. Now we've been taking steps, we need to get ready for a leap.
Mm-hmm. Another question, excuse me, that was submitted was just based on the idea that lots of public bodies are in multi-tenanted buildings and that decarbonising those heating systems is tricky. Might be a question for you, Stephen. What advice would you give to people who find themselves in that position?
Well, there's a lot of engagement required, and we've made that point. From the point of view, if you take, and I just again go back to giving you examples, you can't go to the ESB tomorrow and turn on the tap. They have a huge pipeline of projects. And in certain instances, you nearly need to be beginning now to get something in 2 years' time. And that's, taken into account. That's in reality, they're so backed up with the projects that are going to happen. So that's for taking major projects like depot transitions. So you've got to take that into account in your planning. So if you're starting, you're not starting quick enough. You need to get out of the blocks. And as you said, the minister is saying there, we're not going fast enough, and that's for sure. When we look at facilities, we had a serious project going on in Limerick at the moment, and we converted an old depot into an NZEB, standard building, and that was near zero emission building standard. That actually has been transformational, and the great thing for me is looking at a facility, particularly when you come into the SEAI. A lot of the buildings that have been there have been built since the 1840s, 50s. So high ceilings, old stone wall, beautiful protective structures. So they're difficult, and they're difficult from a whole energy consumption point of view, how you're going to protect them for the future. But the whole idea still is about that you've got to take a view that's bringing us beyond 2050, 30. Let's see what this property is there. Because I can tell you that when Limerick was done last, it was probably 40 years ago. maybe 50 years ago. So we've now put something in place that at least is going to take the next 50 years, hopefully more in place. So the supply side, the procurement of it, the standards that actually on the supply side, when you talk about construction, it's not just that they're available at the standard that you want. And you've got to have really, really high standards. So our procurement team have been at strength, and we have a properties and facilities team. And trying to find the exact team that can come in and do it, they're in short supply out there as well. So it's great to hear there's more coming on, but there's not enough of them. So when you're going to go in there, you're competing for a scarce resource. That's our experience. And hopefully with the money that they're talking about, that there will be more talent attracted into that sector. So make sure, from my perspective, that there's a huge amount we can do, and we're doing all the basics. We have the thermostats at the 19 degrees and the whole lot. But for me, I'm looking at the buildings and trying to say here, with the amount of real estate that sits across the CIE in Ireland, there's a huge amount of roofs where we'd be looking at and saying, can we get solar panels? Can we look at moving those forward? The first is going into in the next couple of weeks in Skibbereen. That's going to be our first test. And then I'm looking at beyond that and saying, well, if we're going to capture that energy and long-term do it, where can we now invest in storage long-term? So already I'm tasking our team to start thinking about storage, because everybody talks about storage facility, but there's not a lot of it actually being developed out there. So if we're going to capture and harness this energy, I want to make sure we store it and put it back into the system. So that's where I see the next plan moving for us in a transition. So I think there's a lot of retrofitting going to happen. There's a lot of future view going to be happening, but it's going to have to be done in a way that is capital intensive, is going to rely on the fact that supply is going to be restricted. But you still have to think, and I talked to my own team yesterday, about the forever projects. Everybody is always in the now. You've got to start thinking about forever projects now and to put those in place, because we have a great window, and it's great to hear there's money on stream. But I have to say as well, it's so disappointing to hear there's $1 billion that was unspent, because I could have spent it.
We all could have spent it, Stephen, no bother.
Yeah, so we'll knock on that door.
But if you're, Anne-Marie, you might, because I know we talked about this backstage, but if you're that person sitting in this multi-tenanted thing, looking at your targets that you have to achieve, does that person have to go and start making friends with all the other tenants and going, let's do this together?
Yes, I mean, partnership, collaboration. And I think the world has changed because of the energy crisis, Ukraine, etc. And I think Mary said earlier, it's on everybody's tongues. I think the door culturally in this country has opened. It shifted from being over there, nice to have, to we need to do. So I think collaboration is critically important. And linking back into the funding availability, talking and planning for a pipeline of projects, and engaging, in our case, with the HSE Energy Bureau to work in terms of tagging what over the next number of years. We've to 2030 with our targets. We all know that disappears in the blink of an eye. And certainly my attitude to funding in the past is to have stuff ready. Because if towards the end of the year there's a few slippage funds that haven't been taken up by others, I would like projects and would have projects ready to go that can be deployed rapidly. They are on the smaller scale of side of things, but they can be moved through, and targeting that. But you have to get your tenants, if you've got multi-area, you've got to talk to all the people involved. And I think you made the point very clearly, you had 25 different people at that launch. We have to think ahead, and that's where I think it has to be the leadership, because it's using the expertise from external and your internal people and plan it ahead. Start with the quick wins, but start planning now for the bigger pieces. We have to change all our boilers. Otherwise, we will not hit our target. That won't happen overnight. We need to plan for it.
So collaboration. And if you could have an energy efficient expert on your board, that helps as well.
Does help.
Yeah. Mary, do you want to leave us with some final thoughts before we go into our coffee break?
Well, one of the things that I'm listening to here and I'm very impressed with is that, we have a body here in the audience who are leaders in our society and who are leaders in their organisations. We all know that when the boss says we want to achieve something, and it can be measured, it will be done. So I think the first issue is that the boss has to say, we're going to be energy efficient. And I think part of the mechanism there has to be thought through. We can't just wait for the big project, which is necessary, and I don't say it's not necessary, but we need to make successes every single month. It might be small. That's the advantage about energy efficiency. It can be small and it can be big, but there should be some success every single month, and it should be put on the notice board that this is the success for March, and this is the success for May, and so on and so on. All these little things help and build awareness about the fact that energy efficiency is a priority and is being monitored. The second thing, I spent 30 years in a public administration, and I've gone through the pain of public procurement. And it's a pain. I have to say it was a pain. And one of the things that I learned out of it is that if you don't devote the time in January and February to setting up your project, it's gone. I'm sorry, it's no good saying, I'll do that in September when I get back after my summer holidays. It just won't happen. If you haven't got it done now, today, the 9th of February, you need to have it done by the end of this month, because you cannot get these big projects out in a year if you don't set that timeline. And it's a nuisance, it's a pain, but you have to do it. So the big ones, the forever projects, they have to be prioritised. Set it up in December, do it in January, February, and then do the small ones throughout the year. It's how it adds up, it's how it makes the difference, and how it does, it delivers on the results. And just one other thing. We have an issue here in the country with regard to resources, human resources, in terms of construction and skills. Here, my plea is, and SEAI, I'm sure can help in this context, and your colleagues can help, where we can use technology. When we can use technology as an alternative, let's put it in place. It doesn't answer back. It can be very efficient, and you can buy it off the shelf.
You don't like what it's saying.
So these would be kind of three of the things that I would just summarise from what I've been listening to. Some of the very good ideas there, some of the real successes that have taken place. But we really do need to continue to push that boat out.
Okay, brilliant. Listen, I think we've heard a lot, we've absorbed a lot. We're going to let it percolate through our brains now in the coffee break. Please, a big thank you to our panel for sharing their wisdom.